Ladies and gentlemen, imagine standing at the bow of a ship whose one trusted compass, the fiat system, is beginning to spin erratically. The charts, our economic forecasts, are becoming unreadable as mounting debt clouds our horizon. What do you do when the instruments fail? You anchor to what endures. You turn to gold. The reality we are living through right now is one of extraordinary debt accumulation, and most people aren't paying enough attention to it. When you look at the numbers objectively, it's striking. Governments are spending trillions more than they are earning, and they are filling that gap by issuing debt at a scale that is almost unprecedented in peacetime. This isn't just about one country, though the United States is the clearest example, with spending around $7 trillion against revenues of $5 trillion. That imbalance creates a compounding problem because it doesn't stop with just one year's deficit. Each deficit adds to the stock of debt, and that debt requires interest payments. Those interest payments are now consuming an ever larger share of total government spending. When debt service costs begin to compete with the essential functions of government, you have the makings of what can be called an economic heart attack. History gives us countless examples of this pattern. Empires and nations reach a stage where their borrowing accelerates to fund current needs, often wars, social programs, or political promises. Initially, it looks manageable because interest rates are low or because global demand for that nation's debt is high. But then conditions shift. Investors begin to question whether they're being compensated enough to take on the risk of lending to a government drowning in liabilities. Interest rates rise, which further increases debt service costs, which then requires more borrowing to cover. It becomes a spiral. This spiral doesn't have a clean or painless way out. You can grow your way out if productivity surges, but historically, governments have more often tried to inflate their way out by printing money, which only undermines confidence further. What worries me most is not just the scale of the deficits, but the complacency. Markets seem to behave as if this trajectory can continue indefinitely without consequence. That's a dangerous assumption. You can't compound debt faster than income forever. At some point, the weight becomes unsustainable, and what usually happens then is a restructuring of some form, either explicit, through default, or implicit, through debasement of the currency. Neither outcome is pleasant. Both involve wealth being transferred, either from creditors who don't get fully repaid or from citizens who find their money is worth less. It's important to recognize that this is not a short-term market call. It's a structural observation. We are at a point in the long-term debt cycle where the pressures are building. Decades of borrowing and easing have created a fragile system. The ship is loaded far beyond safe capacity, and while the waters may appear calm for the moment, it only takes a shift in wind, geopolitical conflict, a downturn in growth, a loss of confidence, to tilt it dangerously. Most people don't notice the risk until it's already breaking over them, because debt problems tend to build quietly and then suddenly erupt. That's the stage we are moving toward, and anyone thinking about how to protect wealth needs to understand that this is not business as usual. When you think about money, most people take it at face value. They assume that a dollar will always be worth a dollar, that the currency in their pocket is stable, and that governments and central banks will preserve its value. But when you step back and look at history, you realize that this faith in fiat is one of the most fragile assumptions in the financial system. Every paper currency ever created has either been devalued significantly or has disappeared altogether. The reason is simple. Governments control fiat, and when they face the pressure of high debts and economic stagnation, they almost always choose the path of printing more money. That decision may delay pain in the short run, but it erodes trust in the long run. The essence of fiat money is that it has no intrinsic value. Its worth comes from confidence, confidence that others will accept it tomorrow, and confidence that its purchasing power will remain roughly intact. But confidence is not infinite. It's a delicate contract between citizens, governments, and investors. Once that contract begins to fray, the decline accelerates quickly. You can see this in extreme cases like Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, but also in more subtle examples where currencies have lost 90% or more of their value over decades of quiet inflation. People didn't notice day by day, but they realized too late that what once bought a house barely covers groceries. The trouble is that the cycle is predictable. When debt burdens rise, governments want to avoid raising taxes too much or cutting spending sharply, because both are politically unpopular. Printing money is the easier choice. Central banks step in with stimulus, bond purchases, or new facilities designed to keep borrowing costs low. Initially, markets cheer because liquidity is plentiful, but the trade-off is hidden. The more money that gets created, the weaker the foundation of the currency becomes. If this continues long enough, investors and savers begin to lose faith. They start asking, what is this piece of paper really worth if trillions more are being created each year? That's when confidence cracks. Gold stands as a contrast. It doesn't depend on the promises of politicians or the decisions of central bankers. It cannot be created by decree. Its scarcity and durability make it a natural store of value, which is why it has been trusted for thousands of years across empires and regimes. When fiat weakens, gold strengthens, not because gold changes, but because the measuring stick, the currency, shrinks. In times of stress, the flight to gold is not about chasing returns, but about escaping from a system where trust has been eroded. The danger we face today is that the erosion of fiat confidence is not being taken seriously. Policymakers assume they can manage inflation, manage debt, and manage confidence indefinitely. But confidence is not something you can control once it's lost. Once people begin to doubt the stability of their money, the reaction can be swift and destabilizing. This is why protecting against fiat fragility is not speculation, it's prudence. The recognition that the faith holding our monetary system together can weaken, and when it does, the consequences ripple through every asset, every economy, and every household. When people talk about hedging, the tendency is to swing to extremes. Either they put almost everything into the asset they believe will save them, or they dismiss the idea of a hedge altogether. Both approaches miss the point. The real art lies in measured precision. A hedge isn't about betting the farm on one outcome. It's about protecting yourself against scenarios that most people ignore until it's too late. The key is to balance, not too much, not too little, but enough to meaningfully shift the odds in your favor when the environment changes. Take gold, for example. It has historically been one of the most effective ways to offset the risks of fiat debasement, high inflation, or debt crises. But owning 50% or 80% of your portfolio in gold isn't a hedge. It's an all-in bet. That kind of approach leaves you overexposed in environments where other assets, like equities or productive businesses, might perform well. On the other hand, ignoring gold altogether leaves you naked to the risks of currency decline and monetary instability. The balance, based on long-term study and historical patterns, lies around 10% to 15% of a portfolio. At that allocation, you gain significant protection without jeopardizing diversification. If fiat weakens, that slice of gold serves as ballast. If growth environments dominate, the rest of your portfolio still carries the load. The reason this balance matters is that we can't predict with certainty which environment will prevail over the next decade. We may face inflationary shocks, deflationary downturns, or periods of strong growth. Each of those environments rewards different assets. Equities do well in growth, bonds do well in disinflation, gold and other hard assets shine in inflation. To be resilient, you need exposure to all of them in proper proportion. That is what makes a hedge truly useful. It's not about chasing the highest return, but about reducing vulnerability to the worst risks. Think of it like engineering. When you design a bridge, you don't build it to hold just the average load. You build it to withstand the unexpected stress. That's how you prevent collapse. The same is true with portfolios. Precision in hedging is about designing for durability. A carefully measured allocation to gold is one of the strongest beams in that structure. It isn't about making you rich quickly. It's about ensuring that you don't lose everything when the storm hits. It's also critical to emphasize that precision requires discipline. Emotions push people to act rashly. Fear drives them to overload on safe havens, while complacency drives them to abandon hedges altogether. The disciplined approach is to set the allocation thoughtfully, based on historical testing and logical reasoning, and then maintain it through cycles. That discipline is what separates those who preserve their wealth from those who gamble it away. In the end, a hedge is not a bet on disaster. It is an insurance policy, a stabilizer, and a recognition that no one can predict the future with perfect accuracy. By being precise, by setting aside just the right share for protection, you gain the freedom to let the rest of your portfolio pursue growth without leaving yourself exposed to ruin. That balance is the essence of resilience. Throughout history, the downfall of monetary systems has followed a familiar pattern. It isn't random, and it isn't unique to one nation or one era. It's a cycle, and like all cycles, it tends to repeat because human behavior doesn't change. When governments accumulate more debt than they can reasonably service, they eventually reach for the same playbook, and the sequence unfolds in 4 recognizable steps. Understanding these steps is crucial because they give us a map of where we are and where we might be heading. The first step is excessive money printing. It usually begins subtly under the justification of crises, wars, recessions, financial meltdowns. Governments and central banks promise it's temporary, that once stability returns, they will pull back. But the appetite for cheap money is addictive. Politicians discover that they can spend beyond their means without immediately raising taxes, and central banks realize they can keep markets afloat with stimulus. Over time, printing and borrowing become the default solution, not the exception. The second step is the reliance on inflationary fiat to pay debts. When the debt load becomes so large that even higher taxes and spending cuts can't bridge the gap, governments quietly use inflation to do the work. By allowing or even encouraging prices to rise, the real value of debt shrinks, and what would otherwise be unpayable obligations suddenly look manageable. Creditors get paid back in currency that is worth less, and savers see their purchasing power decline. It's an invisible tax, and it often buys leaders time, but it comes at the cost of eroding faith in the money itself. That leads directly to the third step, loss of confidence. At first, investors and citizens believe the story. that the situation is under control, that inflation is transitory, that the debt is sustainable. But as inflation lingers and deficits persist, confidence begins to waver. People start to shift into hard assets, foreign currencies, or anything they perceive as more stable. The feedback loop accelerates. The more people move out of the currency, the weaker it gets, and the weaker it gets, the more people abandon it. This stage is critical because it shows that money, at its core, is built on trust. Once that trust is damaged, repair is extremely difficult. The final step is a forced reset. Historically, this has often taken the form of a return to a gold standard or some anchor outside the control of governments. Sometimes it's an explicit restructuring of debt, where creditors are forced to take losses. Other times, it's a collapse of the old currency and the introduction of a new one. Whatever form it takes, the end game is always the same. The system cannot carry the burden of debt and debasement indefinitely, so it collapses into something simpler and more credible. What makes this cycle so concerning today is that the signs of each step are already visible. Printing has become routine, inflation has been used to chip away at obligations, and confidence in fiat is eroding at the margins. The question is not whether the cycle exists. It does. But how far along we are and how quickly the next stage will unfold. Those who recognize the pattern early have the chance to prepare, while those who dismiss it as impossible are often caught off guard when the reset arrives. The most important realization for any investor is that you cannot know the future with certainty. You can have views, you can assign probabilities, but you will never eliminate uncertainty. That's why the most powerful approach to building wealth over the long term isn't trying to be right all the time. It's structuring your portfolio so you don't have to be. The way to do that is by holding a set of return streams that are truly uncorrelated, so that no matter what environment you encounter, at least part of your portfolio is working for you. This is what I think of as the closest thing to a holy grail in investing. The logic is straightforward. If you have one or two bets, your fate is tied entirely to whether those bets work. If they fail, you suffer. But if you can find 10 to 15 good, uncorrelated return streams, something remarkable happens. The overall risk of the portfolio falls by 70 to 80%, while your expected return remains about the same. That's because when one piece is struggling, another is often thriving. The ups and downs offset each other, smoothing the ride and dramatically improving the return-to-risk ratio. Most people underestimate how powerful this compounding effect can be. Gold, in this context, plays a critical role. It doesn't move in the same way stocks or bonds do. It tends to thrive when fiat currencies weaken, when inflation surprises, or when geopolitical risks escalate. Those are precisely the moments when other assets are most vulnerable. By holding some gold alongside equities, bonds, real estate, and even newer stores of value like digital assets, you build resilience into the system. The goal isn't to maximize the return of each piece individually. It's to maximize the stability and reliability of the whole. The problem for many investors is that they mistake diversification for simply holding a variety of assets. But true diversification isn't about the number of holdings. It's about the correlation between them. Owning 5 tech stocks is not diversification because they will all sink together in a downturn. Owning global equities, fixed income, commodities, gold, and other alternatives is closer to real diversification because their behaviors differ depending on the environment. Precision in selecting those streams and ensuring they truly offset one another is what creates the magic. It's also important to view this portfolio construction as dynamic, not static. Correlations shift over time. Bonds that once offered a hedge in disinflationary environments may become less protective in an era of rising rates and high deficits. That's why the process requires constant reevaluation, not blind adherence to old assumptions. But the principle remains: the broader and more uncorrelated your return streams, the stronger your portfolio becomes. At the end of the day, building a holy grail portfolio is less about genius predictions and more about disciplined engineering. You don't need to know the future. You just need to respect uncertainty enough to prepare for it. By spreading risk across multiple uncorrelated drivers of return, you give yourself the ability to survive and even thrive in any environment. That is how wealth endures across cycles, crises, and changing eras. So here's the clarion call. Don't wait for the compass to fail entirely before you act. Anchor part of your financial future in gold's enduring stability. Build your portfolio like a well-tested vessel, not a weather balloon. Prepare, not by fear, but with historical wisdom and thoughtful allocation, because when the storm breaks, and it will, you want to stand firm, anchored to what lasts.